everybody, and welcome to our review of Joker, which is hitting theaters in a couple weeks. And look who I wrangled into the studio to join me for this one. Roth Cornet sitting alongside me.
Dressed as the Joker, Dan Murrell.
Dressed as the Joker.
Yeah, here somewhat appropriately, though. This is not the kind of comic book movie that welcomes cosplay and toys and celebration and Funko Pops at all. This is a very, very, even more than Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, this is the comic book movie that I think is most deeply set in a realistic tone, and just seeped with cynicism, unabashed cynicism.
Yeah, the less I think about this as a comic book movie, the more that I like it.
Yeah.
Because, number one, Joaquin Phoenix is brilliant in this movie. I mean, we know that he's a great actor. Mm-hmm. He's proven time and time again that he's great. He is frightening in this movie. This movie disturbed me more than any movie that I've seen in a long time. And I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. I just mean like it is a strikingly effective portrait of mental illness, of how that warps your reality, how it can warp, if taken the wrong way, the reality of other people and what that can inspire. Mm-hmm. It is very tied to themes of being a societal outcast, of what truth is, of what comes of being mocked, and inside of all of that, it's a Joker movie. Yeah,
it is. And so Joaquin Phoenix, as we talked about a performance that he gave in a movie, I think it was 2 years ago, You Were Never Really Here, directed by Lynn Ramsey. And in that movie, it was very violent and scary. He was a quite different, much more empathetic character in that movie, but he carried it. He carried it from reel one all the way through. And he does that again here. This is Joaquin Phoenix's movie, full stop. There are other actors that are delivering fine performances in the rest of the movie, but it seats you so centrally in his world. And that's right, because his version of the world is twisted. He is isolated within it. He is disconnected from others in any real way. And so you need an actor of his caliber in order to execute this movie. And there is one thing, I won't say that there's anything that people can't debate, because I'm sure there is.
Sure.
For me, his performance is unimpeachable. This is by far the best part and most important part of this film being a success. And he nails it, but it is absolutely chilling. It is terrifying. I wonder if he's had to speak to someone after shooting. I mean, this is the kind of role I really think that gets to you.
It's tough for me, even as we mentioned it before, calling it a comic book movie. It's so not. There's none of that. The Joker is a character, and I'm sure we'll get into this and even more so as the movie comes out, and I'm sure this is going to generate a lot of discussion.
We'll get into that too.
Yeah. The Joker is a character who has always been portrayed, while always a killer, has always been portrayed as still this roguish. He has this roguish charm about him. Jack Nicholson brought this like maniacal kind of glee to the role. Heath Ledger was this sort of playful, anarchist, but still like he's magnetic, and even though you're not rooting for him to kill people, I'm going to show you a magic trick, that's a huge laugh moment. It's an act of violence, surely, but it's more of a character moment to just show like what this guy is capable of. And then you have like the Mark Hamill Joker people love, and Cesar Romero from the Batman series. Jared Leto even was violent, but he was this sort of gangster stereotype or archetype, if you want to go that way. This Joker is the acts of violence that he perpetrates are not done with this sort of maniacal glee or this roguish charm. They're horrific.
They're raw.
They're raw.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely horrifying. They're what these acts would be with none of the sheen on it that has been on this character before. And that is two things, which is one, as I said before, extraordinarily effective in showing what that sort of violence is. And number two, disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really disturbing.
Yeah. They're very raw and they're very realistic, right? Mm-hmm. So it feels as if you're actually watching this happen. But the other thing, and I think that what you noted is so smart and right, and the difference between these Jokers is that those Jokers are performing for an audience. Mm-hmm. They're showmen, you know what I mean? And their crimes are part of their showmanship. They're woven together. This Joker is performing only for himself because he doesn't see other people, because he's sick and he's a narcissist and he's also traumatized and he has PTSD, and other people are only a reflection of his desires for himself or not. Mm-hmm. And once they're not, they are the villain of his story, and that villain deserves whatever the villain gets. Mm-hmm. In his mind. He's not the villain of his story. There's a scene in which he almost basically says, from a certain point of view, in a better way. I really want to make it clear. Right. He's talking about his own perspective, and he's so trapped only in his own perspective. There's another visual reference later that depicts what it would be like to truly only be able to see yourself, the face of yourself in a crowd. And that's the world he's living in. So when he does do flourish and when he does do panache, it's not for anybody. Literally, it could be an empty room. And in one case, it is an empty room. Mm-hmm. It's only for himself because no one else exists. And that's what's terrifying. And I think that's what's real about a person that would take out their anguish in such a violent manner on other people with zero remorse. Mm-hmm. Whether those people, and we'll get into this in the script, whether those people are good or bad people, this person believes, you know. It's
the very subjective telling of how a man comes to justify the murder of anyone that he wants to kill, and why he determines that it's right to do that.
Right. Because he lives in a world.
Because he lives in his own world.
Disconnected from society.
Yes. That is, again, it's like there's two discussions to have about it. As a movie, it's horrifying, it's effective, it's well made, it's brilliantly acted. Structurally, I think there's a little fat. There are some beats that I think get repeated a couple of times that maybe could have been sped through, but ultimately it culminates in a really horrific act because it's presented again with no sheen. This action is just presented as a matter of fact, as snapping your fingers, not like Thanos, but as sneezing or as somebody closing a door, and that makes it more horrific. And I'm not saying it's wrong for the movie to do that. It's effective, but at the same time, it does not give you that out of cinematic barrier of at least it's shot this way, or it doesn't show this, or it. No, it's completely raw. He's very much, Todd Phillips is very much and quite blatantly and unapologetically riffing on the films of Martin Scorsese in the 70s and 80s. And that, frankly, the day that this was announced, I think we did a morning show in which I know I said, this sounds like, some combination of Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. Right. And that really is true. Stylistically, it looks like New York in the 70s, 80s, and 80s. It's Gotham, but it looks like New York. There is extreme levels of poverty. There is a dissonance between the very wealthy and those who are struggling, which there is today as well. Yeah. And there is what feels like a pervasive societal lack of empathy. No one really has empathy for the other, and then the Joker is kind of born of that void of empathy, and that born of that void of compassion between people. He emerges from that. Yeah, it's weird because it's sort of ironic and fitting that like we're in an era now where there is a call from many voices saying keep politics out of our comic book movies. Yeah. This is the most, even though it's set in the 80s, this holds up a mirror to every ugly, brutal thing that's happening in our society today. And not in a Black Mirror way of like, look how terrible this is, but just in a very stark, matter of fact way. It is the worst case scenario that we have seen play out numerous times in the last few years. How someone can become so twisted that they commit these acts of just horrific violence. And that's where the line blurs for me, because as a film, and I'll just say that as a film, I think it's well made. I think it's effective. Review wise, recommendation wise, I would recommend it because I think it's a well made film. But also in conjunction with that, I can't ignore the fact that I don't blame movies for what people do when they're, quote unquote, inspired by them. I think that there's something that's inside somebody that just makes you capable of doing something like that that's not tied to films or music or video games or whatever. But I do think this is the kind of portrayal that can easily be misunderstood by somebody or misinterpreted or taken the wrong way or just interpreted in a potentially dangerous way. I'm not laying that at the film's feet and saying it should be ashamed of itself or that it should not exist or that it's a flaw in the movie itself. I don't think that it is, but I do think that because it is such a raw picture of what one lonely, damaged person can become, it has the potential to connect to people who may be similar to that in a way that could cause them to twist that.
It's scary
message.
to think about how the wrong people will take the message of this movie, which I do not believe is, that's my perception, which I do not believe is the intention of the film. No. However, I will question the film in a couple of ways. I think Joaquin Phoenix's performance is and should be in the conversation for Academy Awards. It's extraordinary. 2, the filmmaking itself, the riffing on Scorsese, it finds its own voice too, and it's really well directed. It's really well shot. It's I would also say that the sense of tension that is created, particularly in the first third before he breaks, I was on the edge of my seat.
Yeah.
It was like watching a 10-year-old who was throwing a fit play with a gun. That's what it felt like watching this movie for the first, say, 25 minutes. After he breaks, actually a little less so, except for certain scenes, which were so filled with menace that this should be called a horror movie.
Yeah.
But the places where I think the actual script structure doesn't serve those elements as well as it might is that anytime you connect too heavily into the Batman universe, it loses me a little bit.
Yeah.
There's one particular thread that I just think you could have renamed that character and it would have served the purpose for the Joker. You didn't need this character. And there's a scene that we've seen a lot in Batman movies that we never need to see again.
Yes.
That we saw here. Like, that's the weakest part of the movie for me. And then the second thing that they did that I think maybe will be a point of contention for people is that they made every single person that the Joker, except for one, where they leave it really unclear what happens with this individual and this crime. Every single person that he is violent against has, in a sense, been mean or horrible and offended and thoughtless to him personally or to others. And in that way, in his mind, and perhaps in the mind of some audience members, deserved it. And it's a tool that horror movies use all the time to allow you to enjoy the kills. They kill the people that you think are jerks.
Yeah.
Where I think it might have been more interesting here is to have this guy who's so clearly disconnected from reality sometimes just misinterpret things.
Yeah.
He's a weird guy. He's got a condition. Sometimes people would just put arm's lengths. Maybe he starts to get more and more angry about that, and he interprets that they're being mean to them or being cruel to him.
Yeah.
And then he acts violently. Now, that's a character that is more real to the kind of violent actors we see in our world. They're killing strangers.
Yeah.
There's no deservability there, but in their minds there is. And so I think where they fail this character a little bit is in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think there could have been a lot more nuance painted if the statement were made, well, they deserved it if these people had never done anything to back that statement up. Again, it is a portrayal of a man who basically, starts knocking off people that he has deemed have offended him. But you're right. They also do, all of them take actions which could be deemed as offensive to him, as slights, as insults, which again, there's just so much to chew on. And the movie that I've seen bandied about in several, particularly on social media, but that people are sort of like saying as a contrast to people that bring up issues with this film is Hustlers, which just came out, and saying like, well, that glorifies crime. But I think Hustlers is a movie, and I said this in my review, like there's not that's not the kind of, first of all, I disagree with some of the assertions. Like I do think that there is some comeuppance. And secondly, again, when I talk about the Hollywood sheen, that movie has that in the sense of like, it is obviously still a very broadly told story about a very specific situation that most people are not going to find themselves in, about, exotic dancers drugging people who are going to strip clubs and stealing their money.
Yeah.
And then, also played, comedically in certain things. It's a very broad Hollywood version of that story. If you want to talk about whether what they did was right or wrong and justified, I think those are questions that the movie answers. This is not that. There's no sheen on this. Yeah. It is just raw. And
I think you can't.
It's hard. This is a very difficult movie.
I think it's hard to have it both ways. It
unsettled me more than any movie I've seen in a really long time.
It unsettled me a lot too, and I think one of the reasons is it's hard to have a movie in which especially like it's okay sometimes with comic book characters to have a little more broadly drawn characters, to have them be slightly more, not always, but like slightly less than human or above human, because that's what they're meant to be, right? The villains and the heroes. They're archetypes or they're myths. But I think it's hard with this movie because it's in certain moments having it both ways, where some characters are broadly drawn, not really the Joker, but some other characters around him are broadly drawn. And yet it's set in this, it's seeped in this incredible sense of gritty, horrific reality. That's where it can feel a little disjointed for me. So again, there was so much about this that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And that's where I think probably some of the critiques are going to come into, because to your point, when you heighten it, and they do in horror movies and things like that, then they understand they're disconnecting from the real world consequences. Yeah. And also, I mean, a final thought about the Joker really as a character, because if this was just called something else, it would be a very different circumstance. Yes. But because it's the Joker, and we've seen Heath Ledger's interpretation of it, and the various interpretations where he has a backstory or doesn't, there are certain characters where showing too much about how they got to be who they are doesn't actually serve that character. This guy has a very interesting story. But those two things sometimes don't connect together. Yeah.
That's my major criticism, I guess, of the movie as well, would be if you literally could just take the word Joker out of the movie and take the word Gotham out of the movie and change one character's name. Yeah. And not change one other thing. And you could pretty much disconnect it entirely from the Batman franchise. Yeah. I do think that if this were an alternate universe where this was just Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix made this story, it would be a horrifically disturbing portrait of what media, the way that, not media, but how the media and how society and how mental illness can all combine together to make this toxic combination to push a guy over the edge, and his real life as well. By adding Joker and Wayne's and Gotham into this mix, it almost trivializes everything else that's going on and mainstreams it in a way that, like, this is not a mainstream movie. You take Joker off of this movie, this is You Were Never Really Here. Yeah. This is a dark, disturbing portrayal of mental illness. I'm with you. My big thing is that by calling it Joker, I think that you put it on a bigger platter and present it in a way that's not caveated and doesn't have certain things attached to it that a movie like this I think should have, and is almost you walk into that, there are going to be people that walk into this movie rooting for this character because he's Joker, and they love Joker, and they love Batman, and you should not, and you cannot root for this guy. You cannot root for him.
And then they show what happens when people take the actions of someone who is fundamentally flawed, damaged, and evil, or does an evil act, and glorify that. They do show the consequences of that, but even in that moment in which I think Todd Phillips pointedly says, like, this is what happens when people think that's great. I think there's still a wrong interpretation where it becomes a rallying cry. You know? So
good on a filmic level, on a cinematic level, a lot of this movie is great. Some of it is, a lot more of it is really good. Some of it is a little tenuous, particularly the connections to the Batman universe that just seem a bit ham-handed. So, you know, I guess on a recommendation level or a review level, I would say that this was a strikingly effective movie. But it honestly scares me a little bit. I'm not going to lie.
I'm not going to lie. It scares me too.
I'm not going to lay that at the movie's feet, and I'm not going to say or give it a bad review because they made an effective film. Like, I can't fault them for that. It's just that we work in the industry that we work in. We're exposed to certain things on a daily basis and see the roots of some of this stuff firsthand. And so I would be lying too if I didn't say that part of this movie scared me, because I see so much of what we see not on screen every single day. And it just with the hope that I would say that if you are, if you're looking for, if you are on the fence about either taking someone to this movie or talking about this movie, like, this is not a Batman canon movie. Robert Pattinson's not going to meet this guy. This is not even about, you know, there's going into like the whole one bad day thing from Killing Joke. Like, it's not even that. It is literally just the darkest Elseworld story you could possibly imagine. It is frighteningly realistic. They do not ever break that and go to cartoonish or comic booky, quote unquote. It is grim and gritty and harsh and disturbing. And just know that going in. Know what you're signing up for. I
mean, speaking very frankly, we're two people that have been threatened by violence over what we had to say about movies, about comic book movies in particular. And I'm not like, that's just like, I've talked about that before. And so,
and if I'm being quite frank, for me, this character,
and
his last iteration,
right. And so for me, his counterpart, Batman. So with that in mind, there is a piece of me that worries, because we're in a world where the line between, I mean, look, and this is a point the movie is making, where we can agree about what basic civility means and about what it means to treat another person with decency, which is not anything that anybody can live up to with perfection in every moment in our lives. Like, you're always just going to be striving to be better at that no matter what. But we can't even agree anymore about where the line is in that or not. And I think it's a point the movie's trying to make, one of the points the movie's trying to make. And I applaud it for that. And I actually think some really interesting conversations are going to happen as a result of that. And I think I do not lay the blame on actions for other people's actions or misinterpretation on the movie either. That is up to the individual ultimately, but it does scare me. And I think it's really well done. I think it's really well directed. I think it's really well acted. I think it's a smart movie that we're going to be talking about for a long time. And the only criticisms that I have in terms of itself is that there are in the script some characters that are very broadly drawn. And I would have that criticism no matter what. They're a little two-dimensional. And the connections to the Batman universe, I think, fall flat. But there is brilliance in this film, and there are some things that don't work. But there is more than that, a ton to unpack about our society. Just a ton about where responsibility begins and ends, where our responsibility to each other begins and ends.
Accountability. the chicken and the egg situation.
The chicken and the egg.
Government. The government's role, social services. I mean,
just
again,
your neighbor.
For everybody's sake, keep politics. This is the most political movie. And not just political, but also just current folding in than any Marvel movie, than any Batman or Justice League movie. I mean, this is, when you talk about a movie of its time, this movie is of this time here today.
It's of this time, but also of the 80s. Yeah. I mean, those facilities that supported people with mental illness that we are now seeing so much damage from, they were shut down then. Yeah. That is when they were shut down. Yeah. And it deals with greed in that manner. The point is, to some degree, I think Todd Phillips is conflicted. I don't know. I'd love to ask him. Yeah. But I think there's some part of him that thinks that the Joker is born of our apathy. And as a result, we made and deserve him. And there's another part of him that says, on a human level, there is no excuse ever to take your pain out on other people, particularly with that level of violence. Yeah.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah, that was the easiest review we've ever done.
Yeah.
Just let's be civil about it is all I would ask. Yeah. Agree, disagree, it's fine. There's a lot to talk about.
It is a provocative film. It is going to be talked about. That's what art does sometimes, but I think this is the first time that this kind of film, this kind of art has been married with the pop culture sensibility of something like a comic book franchise.
Yes.
So I think that's going to spur a lot of discussion and a lot of opinions. I think on a spectrum from, I'm sure many people will be saying this is the most irresponsible movie ever made, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people saying that this is a brilliant piece of art, and there's a wonderful discussion to be had all along both sides of that spectrum. So please engage in that discourse and discussion. It comes out in a couple of weeks here in North America, where more people can see it. The embargo's down so early because it premiered and won the top prize at the Venice Film Festival. We, I think, are definitely going to be talking at a minimum about Joaquin Phoenix into awards season. And obviously, when you get a chance to see it, let us know what you think. And strap in. This is going to be a ride. This is going to be a ride. We're going to be talking about this movie for a while. Roth, anything you want to plug?
Just, let's all do our best to be nice to each other. Yeah. If there's one takeaway.
Yeah, if there's one takeaway, I would hope that's the takeaway.
Try a little harder. We can all try a little harder.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon with more news and reviews right here on Fandom Entertainment. Until next time.